I'm letting them in. Whoops. There's not an admit.
Upper right.
God, technology is amazing.
Isn't it?
Boy.
Oh, look at all these people.
Wave.
Who we got? There's Ross. Oh, there's.
Yes, can you hear us?
Is that Nina Yeager?
Yes.
Hey, how are you?
Yes. It's good. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, wonderful to see you.
I'm jolly now. I've been jolly for 25 years.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
You were in Texas last I heard. Are you still there? Or?
I'm still in Austin. Yes.
Oh, great.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. I have my home studio.
Oh,
3
wonderful.
kids here. Yes.
Terrific. Yeah.
So good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Where's everybody?
Say hi to him. He can hear
I'm
you.
trying
Hi,
to.
Brian. Nick Chapter.
Action.
Oh, he's someone else's.
Yeah.
He didn't hear
Hi,
you.
Brian.
Hey, how are you, Kate?
Good.
Nice to see you.
What
Yeah.
a gorgeous library you have back
Oh,
there.
that's just a fraction. Whose painting is behind you?
I can't tell. All I see is where is the painting?
Behind you in real life.
Oh, whose painting is behind me? Mine.
Oh, great.
Oh, nice.
Mine.
Hi, Catherine.
Hey,
Hey,
good to see you.
good to see you.
Hi,
Different
Brian.
hair than you.
Hi, Brian. Nick Chapter.
Hey, Nate, how are you? I sent you an email last week. I don't think you do email though, so not sure you got it.
Oh, yeah, Arlene. Nice Arlene Bernstein helps
Yeah.
me. Thanks.
See you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. Hi, Arlene.
Hi.
Hi, Brian. Happy to be here.
Oh, I'm trying to help somebody get logged in.
Hey,
here.
Abby. How you doing?
Good to see you. Really good
Good
to
to see you. Yeah.
Yeah.
How's Rosie?
She's doing great. She's due with her second child in 2 months.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah.
Very
She's
nice.
not far from you, is she? She's
3 hours. Yeah.
yeah.
You're really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll say hello for her. For you. Or to
Please.
her.
Yeah. Please do.
I will.
Cynthia Bird.
Hey, Brian.
Waiting room.
Hey, Fred. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Yeah.
Ray.
Yeah.
Oh.
Good. Hi. Hi, Liz.
Hey, Brian. Nice to see you.
Hi, Brian.
Good to
Hi,
see you.
Brian.
Sorry, I'll miss you this week. The timing didn't work out, but
Well, we're going to come back.
We'll
yeah,
do it again soon.
yeah, I'll be here.
Okay, great.
Great reason to come over there.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, how are you
Becky,
doing?
New Mexico.
Hey. Yeah, from New Mexico.
Yep.
How are you?
Very well. We
Yeah,
finally got winter, but no snow.
not. Yep, we had a dusting, but not much. I moved to Maine. Coastal Maine.
This is so bad.
It's
It's just, I'm sorry that I'm distracted. I'm trying to help people who are having tech issues. And it's hard to find them. There it is. Okay. Callie, are you on the waiting room situation? Yes.
Hello, I got it.
Joanna. How are you?
Good.
Nice to see you.
You live in Maine now?
I do. Yeah,
Turn that light on, maybe. So
We're in Maine.
I'm in Kennebunk.
you up.
Oh, I know.
You too bright. You can turn it down.
Up in the Blue Hill area.
Yeah. I was looking up that way and I found a oddball place nobody wanted down here. So I got lucky, little converted barn.
Neat. Nice.
Gosh, there are lots of people on this Zoom.
Yeah.
Great.
That's pretty cool.
I hate to admit this to you, but my cousin is Susan Collins.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Oh,
I just wrote her a note.
Ooh,
Dear.
I didn't like her response, but
Yeah,
I know.
huh.
Well, you should have some leverage.
Yes, right.
Hi, Sarah Gund.
Hmm?
I just said hi to Sarah Gund.
Hello, Joanna Miles.
Hi, who's talking? Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hello.
Meredy, hi.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Hi, Meredy. How are you doing?
Hello, Brian. I'm fine.
Nice to see you.
Very nice to see you too.
Thank you.
Hi, Brian.
Nancy.
I finally got my video going.
good.
Yes.
Hi. Wonderful.
Thanks, Allison.
My pleasure.
Hi,
Meredy. Hi, Meredy Bruce.
Hello there. Hi, Sarah.
Kate.
Are we ready to get started and get things moving? We've got 100 people.
Oh, 100
Well, we're
people.
getting there.
Really? 100? How wonderful.
That's great. You must be popular.
Wait, Bellows is about to enter, so we can't start without her. Here we go. Admit.
Ooh.
Admit. Okay, Kelly, you're still on top of those. I'm going to let you do it.
Allison, you good on the recording? You got that going?
It says recording.
Okay. All right.
I think so.
To cloud. Yeah, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it.
Okay.
All right. We're going to mute everybody in a moment just so that we just not to be controlling, but to make sure that Brian is can get in his flow. But then we'll unmute toward the end when we get into the Q&A time. So any last words?
You're all great.
Hi, Brian.
Great. Great.
Nice to see you, Brian.
Nice to see you.
Okay. I'm going to do a little intro and now I have unmuted.
Muted.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Okay. First of all, I want to welcome everybody, all 95 of you and growing. Thank you everybody for joining us. We're celebrating Brian, his extraordinary body of work, and it's just exciting to see everybody's faces, especially because we've all been so disconnected. I'm Allison Fry, who I think I know most of you. If not, hopefully we will meet each other soon and in person. I'm the Alumni Relations Manager at the school. The first thing we are going to cover is a little bit of housekeeping, just so everybody's on the same page about what's happening tonight. First of all, as just happened, we are going to mute everyone during Brian's presentation. We just don't want any audio distraction while he's speaking. Secondly, what he's going to be doing, first of all, he has a slideshow to show us, which is connected to the book project that he's working on. And then we will see a video tour of his studio. And after that, we're going to shift and do a question and answer time. Just so you know, if you have up in your upper right screen, you'll see a little thing that says view, and you will want to use the speaker view during this call because Brian will be speaking and it will have him present on your screen the whole time if you do that. So take a minute to make that change if you would like. Okay. Okay, so when the presentation is done, we're going to take questions and my colleague Hugh Montgomery will be managing that. You can put your question in the chat window or you can raise your hand in Zoom. And the raise hand feature, which I just learned myself recently, at the bottom you will see a thing that says reactions. And if you click that, there's a little thing that says raise hand and a little emoji hand will appear on your screen and we will be able to call on you to ask your question. So that's how we'll do questions. Either raise your hand on Zoom or use the chat window. And then after that, we're going to open it up for some social time if we still have time left. We plan to wrap up by 8:30, if not sooner. But we hope that we'll be able to do that, even though with a big group that can be complicated. I think it's well worth the effort to make that happen.
Is there any way we can watch the video first?
I don't know. I mean,
it would make more sense because he's doing. I'm on mute.
No, we can hear you. Yeah.
Weird.
Oh yeah, you guys are reverberating because you're in the same room.
I'm on mute. I don't know why it's doing that.
John, if you think that's better, we can do the video first. That's fine.
I think it would make more sense.
Okay. Okay, so getting back to the plan, switching those two things, Brian's going to start with the video and then talk about the book and show his slides. Just a reminder that we're recording. So I don't know if that makes any difference for people, but people want to be able to see the event and the presentation. And we said that we would record it. Okay, that is the housekeeping part. Now moving on to our main event. We are all here tonight, I imagine, because we know Brian through his many, many roles at the Putney School over a career that spanned decades. Teacher, administrator, development officer, founder of the Putney School summer programs, dorm head, and more. And at heart, through it all, Brian, as we know, is an artist. Throughout all of his time working in schools, he has been making art. And now he's ready to publish a book and share more of his art and his story with the world. And we are really grateful to you, Brian, for being here tonight with us and giving us a preview of that book, a glimpse into your process and your work. Brian, I think we are ready to go. You are unmuted, and we will give you a big hand and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Allison.
Have at it.
I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see all of you, even this way. It's just overwhelming to me. I owe so much to Putney. I never would have been a printmaker without Putney. I had to teach it, and I didn't know anything about it. And so I had to learn on my own, which is a pretty good way to learn, and it stuck. And that, and the fact that I've had so many close, enduring friendships from former students and alumni and parents, and they're with me today, and they've been very supportive throughout my illness. I think you know, about almost 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. And I had about a year of remission thanks to my sister in a bone marrow transplant that I had last June. And I relapsed this past June. So I'm still receiving treatment and doing well. Amid all of this, I moved to Maine, and I made a new friend who is a videographer named John, and he was my carpenter. He created a studio in the attic where I moved. I'm in Kennebunk, Maine. He made a little video that's going to show you my surroundings. There are two different settings. There's the third floor studio, and there's the first floor where the etching press is. And I live on the middle floor, the second floor. So I'm going to share my screen and see if I can make this video work for you. Started this plate 25 years ago. Let me get my tools handy in that way. I'm no longer etching. I'm working entirely with hand tools, and they're tools that lighten the plate. And a scraper is like a little plane that removes metal, and a burnisher actually kind of hardens and polishes the metal. The ways of darkening the plate are something called mezzotint. I'll show you how to actually do that. It's a tool that's serrated and comes down to a bunch of little points, and it makes little dots, which are like little burrs in the metal. and they hold ink. They hold quite a bit of ink. And I work with a dry-point needle, which you can't see the lines. There's one. Just making lines directly in the middle. And you can feel it. It leaves a raised, it's called the burr, a raised ridge of metal. And you can feel how rough it is, and that's going to hold a lot of ink. So roulettes, they're actually sewing tools, and they are little spoke wheels that when they're rolled back and forth, will also make a bunch of little dots. And I kind of draw with them. So you can feel it. It's smoother, it'll be lighter. Where it's rougher, it'll be darker. I etched for about 30 years. One of my favorite tools is an engraving tool, and it's a way to actually remove metal from the plate. And it's not much practiced anymore. But I love doing it. It gets a very fine, clear mark. I've never made an entire plate from engraving, but I use it to accent and clarify different edges of working. Oh, that's kind of nice. A train on fire. You can kind of see it. So I'm doing a lot of dry point plates, and they're plates that I do on site, not in the cold weather anymore, but during the spring and summer and fall. And I draw directly in the metal. And you can feel it. You can't see very much, but you can feel it as you work the different textures. And again, the rougher it is, the darker it's going to be, and where it's smooth, it's going to be light. In order to print an etching, you cover the plate with ink, prepared ahead of time. Cover it entirely, and then wipe the ink off of the plate. Now, what the ink will do is stick to the areas that have been etched into the plate, or the areas that are in any way roughened. And the areas that are shiny or smooth the ink can be wiped off of easily. So the ink stays where it belongs, and you get rid of it where you don't want it. And when it's ready, I work with an assistant who will prepare paper, dampen paper for me. Paper will go right on top, blankets distribute the weight, the pressure of the press. And it gets run right through. I'm only pretending now, but this is exactly what it looks like. And it takes, the whole process for each print takes about 10 or 15 minutes. And it's always been that way. It's always taken that long for the 600 years that the process has been around. And there's no way to automate it, and there's no way to make it any quicker. And that's how you print an edition. The idea would be to print a number of prints that are quite similar to one another, and then you have the limited edition of prints. I've been doing this process for about 35 years, actually since I got to Putney, and I wouldn't have done it without Putney. I had to teach it, and I didn't know anything about it. So I had to fake it for a while and learn and read books and copy other artists and pretend I knew what I was doing. And I ended up falling in love with the process. I've been a painter entirely, and my career as an artist has been primarily as a printmaker. I owe that to Putney, and I still love the process. I love its craft and its techniques and its history and its themes, and I'm still wedded to it after all these years. Hang on while I stop that. All right. So thank you to John High Street for the video, and he's done
such a low grade representation.
Anyway. I mentioned that I wasn't etching anymore. I had the process of etching per se involves acids and solvents and chemicals I no longer wanted to be exposed to. So I've been working entirely with hand tools and spending my days when I'm not in treatment or hanging out with the people I love, working on my back catalog. I have hundreds of plates. I always kept them. I never canceled them the way you're supposed to. And so I spend my days reworking them and preserving them and documenting them and going back over that, all my work. I was talking to my daughter, Lee, and she asked me what I wanted to do with all of that. And I thought it would be nice to make a book, a retrospective book that looked at the prints that I had made for the past 35 years. So we've been working on that. And that's the impetus for Allison getting in touch with me for the talk. What I'd like to do is show you, it's kind of a best of, it's about 100 and some, it's a lot of images. I'll go pretty quickly. I taught art history at Putney for years, and I know the hazard is that you'll fall asleep. So I'll do my best to keep you awake. And I will comment minimally. If there's any image that you would like me to comment on when we get to the end, just know that I'll remember it and I can go back to it at that point. So I'm going to share my screen again and enter the slideshow. Last time I gave a talk, I tripped over my computer and it shut and severed the Zoom link, and I could never get it back again. So my standard is to not do that this time. So
Bert.
Share screen. All right. So I'm working on a, or I should say this, I'm sorry, I didn't want, that's what I want. A book of animals. Much of the work I've done has been in collaboration with writers, and in particular, Char de Nord, who taught at Putney, I think from the late 80s through the 90s. And I think he's here on the call. And we had been working on a book of animals. We'd actually done one together in 1995. This is a reprise of it. I reworked some of the plates, added some new ones, Chard likewise with his poetry. So actually working on two book projects. This one is underway. It's called Bestiary. So it's about 35 pairings of prints and poems of animals. And again, these are all etchings. They're smallish. This is about 6 inches wide. This is about 3 or 4 inches wide. So you're probably looking much larger on your screen than they are in reality. The crow and the coyote, I worked on used plates, which I do sometimes. Plates that are left over or recycled, I'll pull them out and work over them. So they're somebody else's marks. I don't even know who in this case, but it's kind of nice to have something to start with. I should say that the slides are not in chronological order at all. They are entirely, where are we? Arranged thematically. Let's see. I did a children's book with my second wife, Holiday Eames, David's mother, and we began it right around the time we began David. So it has special meaning. She wrote the rhyming couplets. I've done about 14 artist books. Artist books are books of original prints, and they tend to be quite precious and costly and are printed in very small editions. So I called this a children's book that no child would ever get near because it was quite expensive and all those things. However, we published it as a trade edition, so you can buy it through Green Writers Press or Amazon. It was Dee Dee Cummings' first book about 10 years ago that she published. So there is a version you can share with your kids and grandkids. Don't know how to get rid of that bar at the top. I wanted the book to be in the model of a 19th century reading primer. At this point, I was doing a lot of letterpress printing, printing from raised type, and I had a large collection of 19th century wood type. So I used one of the wood display typefaces, and I found actually metal type for the body of the text to go with it. And these are relief etchings, and relief etching is made exactly the way an etching is, but it's printed in relief. So as I described in the video, the rough and deep lines are filled with ink, and as you print an etching ordinarily, a relief etching, you're inking the surface the way you would a wood block or a linoleum block. So it's exactly the same process, but the printing process is different. And the color is added by hand coloring with watercolor. I did about 30 books. There are 20, let's see, one for every letter of the alphabet plus 2, 28 prints times 30, so they're about 900. And I farmed some of it out to a good friend of mine, a former student, Sarah Kazemi, who did some of the hand coloring. We spent about a year just coloring birds. I've always treated printmaking, dry point in particular, as a way of drawing. In fact, I stopped drawing at all, except to kind of lay out my prints. And I didn't start again until I was in the hospital. I was hospitalized for, I kept track at one point, but I've since lost track, but it was about 100 days last year. And I just started drawing, and I spent all my days drawing. And it took me a while to relearn it, because for so many years, my form of drawing was working directly on metal plates. So this section are just some still lifes I've done. I did this actually during a Putney trip to Italy. It was just an absolutely wonderful time. I hope there's some of the students from that trip are part of the Zoom, but we had just a fantastic time in 2005. And this was a little arrangement of apples and pears on the table. This and the following image are from a book I did. I came across a pile of metal plates that had been used to print a book about Rembrandt paintings. So each one contains a little Rembrandt painting, and I reworked them with hand tools at the time and hand coloring. So they're ornamental orchids, this and the one before. This is my most recent project, except for the animals. Before that, I worked on it for about 10 years. It's a series of plates. I quit after about 45. I just really overworked them and got tired of it. But they're based on a 17th century emblem book, that format, which was a kind of a spiritual how-to book of commonplace images that had a greater significance, that was expanded upon. There was an aphorism that was attached, usually in Latin, attached to the image, and then there was a lengthy explanation. I left that part out, and I created these images and attached them to a particular aphorism. I'd like to read them to you. They're in Latin and English. I don't know Latin at all, and Gordon Jones, Emily's husband, was a big help to me with the Latin. But I'll read you the English version of the aphorisms. A wing is nothing unless it is used. A rare bird, moved by light. Without hope, without fear. Even war has its rules. From the moon, knowledge. Trust in things not seen. Live, grow, flourish. The deepest rivers flow with the least sound. Seek to be like the rock. Time is the consumer of all. A glimmer in the water. From the depths. It goes on like this forever. She hides her head among the clouds. The rose gives the bees honey. I had intended it as an artist book, but things kind of got away from me, and including the number of images. So I created a line of cards, actually, which I regret to this day having done, because there are so many of them. And they're, anyway, they have the accompanying aphorism in Latin and English. About 15 years ago, I did a series of prints based on the tarot. I'm very interested in the history of printmaking, and among the earliest prints, printmaking doesn't go back that far. It goes back much longer in Asia than in Europe, but printmaking in Europe can be dated from the 15th century. And among the earliest intaglio prints, that's engravings and etchings, were tarot cards, and they were treated as what they called a cosmography, which was not for fortune telling and not as a game, but as a visual replication of a worldview. And I love that idea very much, that a philosophy can be embodied in pictures. And I've set out to do that. I think the emblem book is in many ways that. This fit into that earlier format of the tarot. I chose the Major Arcana. There are 22, and I selected a few here. I substituted, some are quite obscure, and I substituted the 4 elements for some of those, like the Hierophant, because nobody knows what that is. So if you see unfamiliar cards, that's what they are. And the only text is the calligraphy on each card. I mentioned that I've done about, I think, 12 or 14 artist books. I also did a number of broadsides. A broadside is a single-sided, single sheet with an image and usually a poem associated with it. And for me, this was a great pleasure. I got to work with a number of really wonderful poets. Usually they would select a poem that they wanted me to respond to. This is 2 poems actually by Char de Nord. And I had begun this with the traditional iconography, the figures of Adam and Eve. And a good friend of mine said I had done this secondary image as kind of an afterthought of just a hollowed out house, a burned out building, that sense of emptiness and disconnection. And my friend said, you know, forget the figures. You should just use this image. It's more powerful. And She gave me very good advice, I feel. Later on, if you'd like, I can send you some of the images individually if you want to read the poems, which I apologize, there's not enough time to read them now. Also, in collaboration with Chardonnay. This was the only color etching I did. You don't see much color because I got rid of the colors. It was 4 plates and I ended up printing them all in black. This was a ballad by Stephen Sandy, who was a professor at Bennington College for many years. It was in opposition to the first Gulf War. This is about 1993. This is a project, I'd like to say I did it with Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I did it of one of his poems. And I asked him to sign them and he wrote me back a 3-page letter, which was quite wonderful, telling me that he didn't have time. There were only 25 copies of this, this broadside, and writing Lawrence Ferlinghetti would be 50 words. And he wrote me about 300 words in his letter. So he must have had other reasons, but it was quite a nice memento. Alicia Ostreicher. If you recognize the dog, he's been repurposed for the Bestiary, so without the color. This is an image of the landscape as a parallel for a state of mind, a state of feeling, of, again, emptiness and loss. It's a very powerful poem, and I felt this was a particularly close alignment of our imagery. Gerald Stern and Lee Young Lee. I titled this section Oddities. These are prints that didn't belong to any particular book or theme. Might be just some particular image that caught my eye or my mind. I've always been drawn to this sea. I'll show you in a little bit a lot of etchings of boats that I had done. I've since begun to collect them, oddly enough, and I've managed to get only one in the water one time, but they're taking up much of my yard. This was inspired, if that's the right word, provoked by car bombings in Iraq in the early 2000s. It's called Car Fire. This was related to the broadside I did on the Lawrence Ferlinghetti poem. I just love amusement parks. I think they're just kind of beautiful and absurd and fascinating. So this is Luna Park from Coney Island. Throughout my work, I've been looking for ways to make marks that weren't necessarily autographic, that weren't necessarily made directly by my hand. And at some point I discovered engineers' templates, and they don't make them anymore because they don't need them anymore, but they're made by a company called Pickett, and they're this particular green plastic, and they were all kinds of shapes for devices and doorways and electrical symbols. And I evolved a way of working in etching that used air tools, so I could actually use them as stencils. So much of the challenge of my work as an etcher is just to get soft edges. Etching doesn't allow them easily. So I've evolved ways of working, which I'm happy to talk to you about in a little bit. But that's why this looks the way it does. I did multiple disasters. I think it was a millennial fear that we collectively shared, but around the time I became obsessed with just things going really badly in nature. And sure enough, they have. As a really interesting sideline, I've done a lot of natural science illustration, and I did 2 books with Tom Wessels, whom you may know. He taught at Putney for about 15 years in the late 70s through the 80s, I think into the early 90s. And this was not from one of his projects. It was a different book about actually mushroom communication, way ahead of its time. It was about 20 years ago. And the book never got published, but I liked the image from it. And this is an image of the conductor. I've always played music as an amateur, and this is a view of the conductor from the viola section. I like to joke that you actually wouldn't see that because the violas never look up at the conductors. So there you are. And this is a book I did called Town in 1995, and it was based on postcards. And I took images from my life. My studio at this point was in Bellows Walls, Vermont. And this was the stairs directly across the street from me. And I made it look like a turn of the century, turn of the century hand tinted postcard. And for the text in this book, I took the what people had written. And at this point, you could send a postcard for 1 cent, but you were only allowed to write on a little strip about a half an inch at the bottom of the image side, and the reverse had to be the address and the stamp and nothing else. So people wrote the pithiest and often most moving and wrenching little correspondences. They're like tweets, except they're much more potent and affecting. The first book I did was based on Dante's Inferno, and rather than reprint the Inferno, which I was not prepared to do, I worked at that point. Chard Denord had come to Putney, and we realized we both had an interest in this text, and we began to work on it. So I think he worked more from my images than from Dante. Dante's pretty hard to come right up against, but it was a wonderful collaboration, the first of many. So each of my images, I left the people out of it altogether. Each is a landscape from the Inferno related to a particular canto and a particular line. So they are scenes, they're landscapes from hell. This is the castle. All the notables who were born before the advent of Christ are condemned to limbo. So they live, actually they live pretty well in this castle. And this is a kind of amalgam of different architectural inspirations. And I want to point out for the Putney audience that this center area, I don't know if you can see my cursor, are the windows of old girls' dormitory. I saw them one night and I thought, that's perfect. I'm putting that in my etching. This is called Plain of Tombs. Broken Bridge. The Wood. These are the suicides that are petrified into these unruly vines. And then Dante is tricked by Virgil into picking one of them. And it responds. It is an embodied person condemned to this form, and he bleeds. So there's a little red stain there. I became just enamored of all things Italian. And I did a book in the mid-90s based on a trip to Italy. And I mentioned that I returned in 2005 with a group of 10 Putney students, a trip to Tuscany. But the book I had done in the 1990s is centered on an abandoned abbey near Siena called San Galgano. So these are images mostly from that site. This was done on a plate I think my daughter had worked on, and she made a little etching, and you can see her checkerboard there, and it looks like some little animal there. So I'm sure I printed it for her and saved a copy, and then I reworked over the plate. But there's something about the Italian landscape that it's just so beautifully composed. I mean, you can't look anywhere. I think it's because it's been husbanded and cultivated over millennia, and it's just, it all seems right. And it's quite disarming to come back here after that. We've always, I think, in the United States, felt we had more land and haven't treated it with the same, quite the same sense of care and the same aesthetic. This was started in Italy as a dry point, then I returned and worked on it in the studio, which is something I've done. I often will begin a plate on site, bring it back, print it, see what it looks like, and then continue to work on it and develop it. I did a book of bridges in the early 90s, and I founded my press, my eponymous press, Bridge Press at that time. So the imprint I've published artist books and broadsides under, and a few trade books, has been Bridge Press. These are quite a bit larger, and these are among the largest etchings I've made. This is, I think, 19 inches wide. This is Bellows Walls again. That arch bridge is sadly no longer there. This is Brattleboro. And it looks quite different now, but if you know the town, it's the Whetstone coming out into the Connecticut, Montastic behind it. This building is gone. There are no steam locomotives anymore, but the train still passes over this bridge. The water level is much higher. They put a dam in Vernon and the water backed up, but this is around 1900. This is the Brooklyn Bridge under construction. A fascinating story historically, just absolutely extraordinary. Little known is that it was actually completed by a woman, Emily Roebling, who was, her husband, Washington, was incapacitated, and she supervised the last 5 years of construction and completion of the bridge. This is called Angel of the Bridge, after a short story by John Cheever. I've always been into transportation. I just love its history. I love its shapes and its forms. And my father, who is 90 years old, and still working, is a noted aviation illustrator. So I did this as kind of a homage to him. I did that for my daughter. She was obsessed with the Titanic. And this is before the Leonardo DiCaprio movie came out. And I did it as a gift for her. She memorized every factoid about the whole disaster. It was quite impressive. I'm having a little technical problem here. Let me see if I can, there we go. All right. I did a series of Zeppelins about 20 years ago, around 2000. And another fascinating historical epoch was Zeppelins. They were, I think, absolutely the most brilliant way to travel. They went about 90 miles an hour at about 1,000 feet high. And you could get where you were going much more quickly than you could on an ocean liner, for example. And you could see the world as you moved along. And unfortunately, they came to a bad end. But these are loosely based on the Graf Zeppelin, which of course never did see the Eiffel Tower because the French would not allow it to happen. But I pictured the Zeppelin in various guises in its travels and its sort of life history. This is the interior of a Zeppelin. It has a rigid armature and then various sort of bags of hydrogen or helium that fit within that. They were used briefly by the Germans to bomb London in World War I, but they proved to be an easy target. So here's a British biplane shooting one down. And the remnants of it. Did a series of steam locomotives in the mid-90s. They're kind of like graphic novels. When I do a book, there's an order to them. There's a sequence, and some shape or something will propel you ahead, and there's a meaning to the order of them. So I think of them as graphic novels, and they tell a story. It's not a story that could be written. It's not a literal story. It's not really even a historical record, but I think of them as living things in their own world, in their own life cycle. A train entering a tunnel. I mentioned I'm very interested in music, and I've done two books that were related to musical pieces. One is based on Die Winterreise by Franz Schubert, and the other is based on Pioneer Lunaire by Arnold Schoenberg. And I'll show you the Die Winterreise first. If you haven't heard it, it's probably the most wrenching piece of music I've ever become familiar with. It's very difficult, very trying. I'm not really a winter person. And it's, in short, the story of a jilted lover and his despair and his nocturnal wandering into oblivion in the middle of winter. So it's bleak. So if you could picture all these scenes, dead of winter at night. This image needs a little explanation. Our protagonist begins to hallucinate. He's freezing to death and he's just wandering aimlessly. And he's longing for death, and he sees a graveyard, and it appears to him as if it's an inn welcoming him in from the cold. So he's having these delusions, and I conflated what a graveyard and the windows of an inn might look like. This is the Pioneer Lunaire. It's the last completed artist book that I did. I worked with a wonderful printer for many years who died around this time. And he was just a brilliant typographer and printer. So I would create the images, I would print the images, and then he would set the type and print the text. I did a translation from the French. Now, Pioneer Lunaire was written originally by Albert Giraud, who was a Belgian poet, symbolist poet in the last decade of the 19th century. It became a much more notorious, scandalous piece when Schoenberg set it to music in 1913. Every translation I could find of the Pioneer Lunaire was not from the original French, it was from the German libretto for the Schoenberg. So I went back and translated from the original French. It was my one bit of scholarship. And I relied on my high school French, and Marie Desreaux, who has taught French for about 20 years at Putney, helped me with a lot of the euphemisms. So the translation, it's printed 3 different typefaces in 3 different languages, in English, German, and my translation from the French. I should also mention, these are exactly the same plate. I talked about relief etching earlier. It's just a different way to print an etching. So if you look in this case on the upper left, that's printed the way you normally would print an etching, by filling all the rough and deep parts of the plate with ink and wiping the surface clean. The other one, the other image, just the surface is inked. So anything that was below the surface didn't get ink and remains white. So they're almost a negative of each other. The information is a little bit, it reads differently depending on how you ink it. So they're not quite a perfect negative, but I like that idea of reversal. So playing with that idea, Pierrot as a character, he comes from the Commedia dell'arte, and he's a kind of a poet, and he's very sentimental, but also quite irascible and violent, and he can turn very immediately. It's he's both an attractive and a repulsive character. So I wanted that idea of just sudden reversal. Pierrot was a not very good violist like me, so I identified with that. I've worked a lot with what's come to be called sacred geometry, but it's been around forever. And it's basically the geometric underpinning, the kind of scaffolding of a rectangle. And I've always been fascinated by it. And I often use it to compose my images, but I rarely let it be seen, but it was appropriate to this particular image. So that's what you can see here. I mentioned earlier the technique of dry point. It's a means of drawing directly on a plate. There are no acids and grounds. You're drawing with a sharp tool, and you're basically creating a raised ridge that holds the ink when you print. And it often has very soft edges. It's not etched under the surface the way an etch line or an engraved line is. It's kind of hanging about over the surface. So the ink spills out very generously, and they almost look like ink drawings, which was what the look I want in my dry points. And I've done them since the 1980s. This was actually, this was done on a long spring trip with Tom Wessels in the late 1980s to Mount Desert Island. I always loved Maine and ended up moving here, not that far down east, but this was on a plate a student had made and printed and thrown out. This is the Beehive in Maine. This was another long spring trip with Jay Jenkins in the early 2000s to the Sargent Center, kind of an art retreat in Peterborough, New Hampshire. And this was up Lake Temagami. I know there's a Putney connection, several families, but became very close to Ann Vidor, who many of you knew from the class of '54, and spent some time with her up at Temagami. It was her favorite place. And another one of my favorite people, Libby Mills, who I think might be on the talk, last summer, 2 summers ago. I lost a year somewhere in there. I went up to her cabin where she summered for as long as I've been alive anyway, 60 plus years. And this is a view of the harbor in Swans Island from right near her cabin. I've been, I would say, obsessed with the Connecticut River. It's been a touchstone for me. Every place I lived, and there have been quite a few around Putney, has always been in view or near the river. And I've made many etchings that were a simplified view of just the sky, the land, and the water. Those shapes, those 3 different shapes, and various just variations of those. This was from last fall, not that long ago. And I no longer have any big ideas. So I am continuing to work on the dry points. And as I said, they're basically drawing. I'm drawing directly on metal plates. They're really interesting. I'm kind of a perfectionist, and the beauty of dry point, you can't see what you're doing when you do it. You can feel it. So you can feel how rough the marks are, but they're not dark. They're the same color as the metal. And it's not until later when you go back and print them that you can see what you've done. So you kind of have to put it in on faith and just from reacting and responding to what you're seeing. So I find it really quite liberating. And I don't really have any big themes anymore. There's nothing I feel compelled to undertake at this point. So I'm doing a lot of dry points where I just sit and I just am there.
Kind of a perfectionist.
Just responding. And that's what I've been doing lately.
Oh, I love your perfectionism. I love it.
And I'm going to finish with the sorry. Yeah. For many years, I painted watercolors. I had my education is as a painter, and before I began making prints at Putney, I was through and through a painter. And my way of getting back into color was working in watercolor, again, directly from observation. It's also my way of getting outside. And I would do hundreds of watercolors a year. I set myself the challenge of making the painting within the time it takes for the paper to dry. So most of them are done within 10 or 15 minutes. And I'm going to show you a selection of the paintings. So they're really a departure from my black and white work. They're somewhat like the dry points in that they're reactive. They're done immediately in response to what I'm seeing and feeling in the landscape. I put a few Putney images. This is a view, I can't remember which direction, but from campus. And this is Green Mountain Orchard in the autumn. Connecticut River. I lived in Westminster for a number of years, and the view was of a Bald Mountain. It's sort of a double hump to the north near Allen Brothers, if you know the area. And I would just go out every evening and paint, and basically making the same painting hundreds of times. That's that same view. I moved to New Hampshire about 8 years ago. Don't hold it against me. And as Bob Mills always said, it's the state you have to go through to get to Maine, and that was my end goal. But this was a view of the Connecticut River Valley looking back toward Vermont, one of my favorite spots. It's Cannon Mountain in the White Mountains. I did an artist residency a few years ago in Nova Scotia, and I had a lot of time, which I wasn't used to, and most of it was during the day. I was used to painting at sunset because I would work all day and come back and paint. In the summer, it would be light, fairly late. So I introduced pencil into the watercolor because the variations of color weren't as vivid as I was used to. For a brief time, I was in California, big mistake. And I lived at about 6,000 feet. And every day after work, I'd come back and look out and paint the sunset, looking, that's Lake Hemet looking toward the Pacific Ocean. So and that's it. So I hope you can still hear me. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the book projects. I mentioned the Bestiary. I'm going to publish that myself, and that's already underway. And it's being designed by a wonderful designer. I think she may be on this call, Marjorie. I've worked with her for about 30 years. I bought her house in New Hampshire, and she's been a lifelong friend. And she's designing both that book and a retrospective book of my work, which will comprise about 200 paintings and prints from the late 1980s until this past year. Also working on that with an art historian I met relatively recently, a brilliant professor at Hampshire College, just retired, named Sarah Levine. And she's working on an essay about my work. It's really a wonderful perspective for me to have to look back at my work and to feel, pretty good about most of it, and to understand what I was trying to do and feel that I had gotten it across. And I feel incredibly fortunate to be where I am, and to have the opportunity to look back at what I've made. And anyway, I'd love to take some questions if we still have time.
I have a couple of questions that have shown up in the chat, Brian, that you may not have seen. Before I ask them, I just want to say what a privilege it was often to travel with Brian and to look at the world through his eyes as a creator, and to learn so much from him and what he saw in the world around him. And in visiting with many of you over the years, it's been a real pleasure. Couple of quick questions, Brian. Greg asked about the size of the watercolors. How big are they?
They're almost all 6 by 12 inches. I found that format and stuck with it. And I stuck with the same paper and the same watercolor blocks for years. So 6 by 12 inches. A couple are a little bit bigger, but none of them is really very large.
Ken asked what your plans are for your work.
The actual work?
Yeah.
That's a great question. It's a real dilemma for an artist. And I've heard too many stories of artists who have died and their work ends up in a dumpster. And I didn't want that to happen. And so I've methodically, for me, begun to document and preserve the plates that I've always kept. So the work you've seen, there's a plate from which those images were taken that exists. And I'm getting a lot of help from Kelsey Miller, class of '03. She's been wonderful. She's very organized. She's a paper person, and she's come and helped me put my prints away. I stopped selling work because it was just, I'm not going to outlive my retirement savings at this point, and I just wanted everything just put away. It gives me kind of a feeling of comfort to know where things that are at this point. So they're all in a little apartment at the back of my garage, the room where the etching press is, behind the motorcycles. They're in boxes and drawers and flat files there, and pretty well organized, thanks to Kelsey.
Cordelia has a question as well. I don't know what it is, but if you could unmute and ask it, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm curious about, you mentioned that you've tried in a lot of ways to find ways of making marks that aren't autographic. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about why that appeals to you. And I'm also curious if there's a connection between that and your tendency towards collaboration.
It's such a great question. And I think part of the reason printmaking appeals to me is that the process is interrupted constantly. It's broken down into these interventions, these sequence of interventions. And even the dry point, which is very autographic, I can't see it when I do it. And I think it goes back to a kind of perfectionism. And when I paint and draw, it's like, I want to change it. I judge it immediately in the present, and that inhibits the process of making it. And when I taught, I would just always encourage kids not to judge their work while they're doing it. There's a time to do it. It's important that you judge it, but I would make them not throw it out. I'd say, you have to keep all your work this semester. you know, at the end of it, you can recycle all of it. I don't care, but you need that distance. And printmaking gave me that distance. The collaboration piece, I think it's something else. I think I've always liked words. I'm not a poet at all. And I like the idea of getting at imagery visually and verbally, textually. I like the idea that you can do both and aim for something that's where there's a good deal of synergy and overlap. But I decided at a young age not to be an illustrator like my father, because illustration is usually beholden to the text. And I like the independence of the visual image and the verbal image. And Chard and I don't work hand in hand. We understand each other fairly well. We understand each other's work, and we kind of get a sense of what we're heading toward, but we're both aiming at the same coyote or whatever subject we're working on at the time. I hope that answers your question. Great question.
I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment. If I'm missing one and somebody wants to just chime in and ask it, go to it.
Hi, I love some of the textures, and some of them look like they come from nature, almost like you put something on the plate. And you talked about using air tools. I wonder, is there a way of making surprise textures like cracks? I love the cracks, for instance.
That's a fantastic question. There actually is a way of impressing textures from the world into an etching plate called soft ground. I don't use it that much. It's way fun because you can take anything that you can push into a plate and its texture will remain. The cracking is a kind of a chemical reaction. I won't get into it, but it takes a lot of trial and error. And the tarot, a number of the images from the tarot book were done using various chemicals in their liquid state. And you get them to form in such a way that, hey, I like that, I want to keep that. And often you bake them. You find a way to fix it so that it'll survive time in the acid bath, which it needs to do in order for the image to remain permanent. But that's been another way of my finding means of making marks and textures in the world that were beyond what my hand could do. That one thing I love about printmaking, the language of it is so broad. It's way beyond, it includes what you can do with your hand, but it's way beyond that. So
relevant to that, in the watercolors, there are some black lines that almost look like sumi ink or pen that has run into the watercolor.
No, I never used black, and I don't know. I wonder if you were thinking about the dry points. They look like the sumi ink
No,
painting.
it was watercolor with color and a black line going through it. Anyway.
Yeah.
Black paint.
You know, there are a couple times, I think I know what you're talking about, like where I was painting the water, and I would just rule a pencil line for the horizon. I'm sorry, I think that's what you meant. Yeah. Rarely, occasionally, I think that's, I do that. I think that's what you meant. Yeah.
I have a question about the calligraphy. Is that something that you did yourself, or did you work with other people who were calligraphers?
No, I worked with a professional calligrapher. If I had it to do life to do again, I would learn calligraphy. I think it's brilliant, and it's a shame that handwriting, cursive writing isn't being taught anymore. And I let mine go to hell just because I don't use it much anymore. But I did find somebody who was really good at it. Congratulations, Hallie, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Can I ask a question, Brian?
Sure.
The work is so thrilling. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate.
Absolutely beautiful. And it's a great privilege to see so many things through so many decades of your work. Talk a little bit about Seurat. Clearly, when you look at your work, there's a big influence of Seurat. Is that somebody whose work you love, or you don't think of him?
No, I think of him all the time. In fact, just the other day, I was downloading images. I was working on some dry points, developing them in the studio, thinking, well, where do I place a tree? I want to put a tree in it. I go right to Seurat because he put things in the right place. And he had an even greater obsession with geometry, as you know. And he was a colorist. He's an extraordinary painter for so many reasons, but he had the whole black and white thing just completely mastered, and he had the color thing mastered. And they're kind of not all that closely related. And I respect that. You know, I don't put myself in the same sentence, but I do admire him. And
I would think he had the drawings more. The drawings more than the paintings.
Absolutely. And to the best of my knowledge, I think he made one print, and it wasn't at all like drawings. It was of that Can Dancers, a late painting he had done, but he was not a printmaker, but his drawings are extraordinary. I look at them actually quite a lot, and his paintings as well.
Thank you.
Joanna Miles, did you have a question?
Joanna, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, Kate.
Yeah.
You know, my parents are artists, and I've had a terrible time because they never really did a proper job of archiving their work. And
Do you still have their work?
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah.
And I buy it. I mean, it goes online, and I buy my father's paintings. Not all of them, but the ones I can afford. But it's very upsetting to not have it archived, to not have a real sense. I found portfolios of my mother's slides, and I have no idea who owns those paintings because she never wrote it down, you know? Yeah. And I think it's terribly important as an artist that you, and you know, the other thing is the Smithsonian. That's not a bad idea, just to give them a little bit of stuff so that you're there. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I think Brooke Claggett may have wanted to ask a question.
I did. Am I unmuted?
Hey, Brooke, how you doing?
Hey, Brian. How's it going?
Good.
This is amazing presentation. Like, this is so wonderful. I just want to thank you so much. But my main question is, which Putney class of artists was your favorite?
Well,
I'm joking. That wasn't my question. That was my question. But we were pretty great.
You guys were great.
Earlier in the chat, I did ask a question.
I'm sorry, Brooke.
Sorry,
yeah.
I don't have great reception. So
yeah.
Again, can you repeat what you said?
I didn't hear your whole question. I did hear the first part. And it's funny you mentioned that, because around the time you were at Putney, I came to Putney in 1985, and I was 26 years old, and I had never taught in high school. I shouldn't have been hired. I just didn't have experience. And Sven Huseby, bless his heart, took a chance on me, and Barbara Barnes. And I'd always loved teaching there. I mean, from the first day, and I can remember who was in my classes. And I think there was a time, probably from then to the early 90s, when I just kind of hit my stride, and the school was really kind of in a good place, and the kids were just super energetic and creative and troublesome in a good way and in some bad ways, and it was a great time. So that might be my favorite time teaching. And there was another time in the mid-2000s, I moved back onto campus. I'd always worked mostly with girls, and I'd run a girls' dormitory. And I had a son at that point. I remember thinking, I need to figure out boys. So I moved into New Boys. And it was another time where I was just happily immersed at Putney. And I took a trip with Lise Pasterkamp to Holland, an art trip, which was great fun. It was kind of hypothermic, but fun nonetheless. And the trip to Italy that I mentioned. So, but I've just always loved teaching there. I can't imagine a better place to teach art, really. I later, when I returned to Putney and did development work, I could see the whole sort of lifespan of from age 14 through people in their 90s, what the school did to them, what it meant to them. And that was very powerful for me, very moving to see. I never had that with an institution except Putney, and I'm not an alum. I had it as a teacher. But to see how thoroughly a school can influence you, how positively, in ways that people in their 80s and 90s would tell me they were still vividly grateful for. And it was just wonderful to hear that. And I was, I'm lucky to be part of that with so many people for so many years.
Well, I don't know why if you wanted to learn about boys, you went to new boys instead of like key for old boys. Like that would have been.
Yeah, it wasn't much of a challenge. Yeah.
Katrina has a question, it looks like, if I'm reading it right.
But, okay, can I just say one thing? You?
Sure.
You, is it okay if I?
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead. Go ahead. I can't hear you very well, but go ahead.
Hey, Brooke, you should probably check it out because we're not hearing you.
Yeah, if you people want to make a general comment, put it in the chat, and I think everybody can see it. Katrina, you want to go? I think you have to unmute yourself first.
Sorry. Hi, hi, Brian. I don't have a specific question, but just wanted to say what you were just saying totally resonates with me. And I don't know if you remember this project. Yeah. I just found this bestiary that we did with you, and I would love to hear if you have anything to say about the project weeks you did. I know Tara was on here, and she mentioned the Brooklyn Bridge project also.
Project Week's the best thing in the world as far as I'm concerned. I've always been kind of a interdisciplinary person in a way. I've just had interests outside of art and that could be encompassed by art. And I think to have that opportunity, using art as kind of a way to touch on so many aspects of what it is to be alive and to learn, that's what Project Week was. And I just loved it. I kind of miss it, actually. So, but yeah, I loved thinking of things to do, you know, with small groups, but to have that kind of time every day and that period set aside. You know, Putney's a busy place and the schedule's, I think, gotten a little bit better, but it's still rough. It's a hard place to go to school, and you got to be this place and the other place, and you're always thinking many things. And Project Week, you kind of settle in and just, you know, lean in for a while. So I loved it.
We have a question from Kit Lucas. You'll need to unmute there, Kit.
Oh, there we go.
Hey, Kit, how are you doing?
All right, Brian. All right. When I left in 52, I was there from 48 to 52, music was still king because of Norwood. And Jurassi tried to make art at least queen, if not king. Did that change when music stopped being the important thing at Putney? Did art, painting, sculpture, making of paper become the most important evening activity or artistic enterprise?
I think so. I think that's true. And I think that probably happened around the 70s and 80s. And I think there's kind of a balance at this point and has been for a while. And one thing I liked about Putney is that you didn't really have to, you didn't have to major. You didn't have to kind of commit yourself entirely. And for a while, I taught a science class with a real science teacher, and we got a lot of people who I'd never seen in the art building before. And the science class used drawing as a basic tool for seeing the world and describing the world. And they were doing extraordinary work, and they didn't see themselves as artists. But it became part of their ability to state what they saw in the world and what they understood about the world. So I think, Putney, the parallels, it's not siloed, it's not insular. And whenever I saw it heading in that direction, I would react to it not well. Because I think its breadth and the fact that you can go deep on something is really important.
Char, did you want to add something?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to say what an enormous pleasure it was working with Brian all these years. I'm still working with him, so I feel extraordinarily lucky to continue this relationship with Brian on the Bestiary that's going to be coming out fairly soon. But you know, it's just kind of astounding for me to see this body of work now. I mean, we work so closely on these individual projects throughout for over 30 years, and I was always so immersed in the project at the time. But now to see a kind of retrospective of it is. It makes me realize how enormously influential Brian was, and just the best collaborative way on my work, are leaving each other alone to do our own things with Dante, or with the train, or with the Tree of Wisdom, or with Adam and Eve, which I never would have done otherwise. So I just want to say publicly, very publicly here, what a great honor and pleasure it's been working with Brian, and continues to be over all these years.
Thank you, Chard. Right back at you.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're just about at time, I think. Unless somebody has another burning question or comment, I think I'll throw it back over to Allison to take us out for the evening.
I even remembered to unmute myself before doing this. First of all, Brian, we thank you so much for doing this tonight, and for all of our worries about tech problems. I think it went off really, really well. So thank you for that. And thank you, John, for your help in making that happen. I want to just a couple things about Brian's book and his website. We'll share that information with all of you after this meeting. His website is briandcohen.com. His email, I think you can find it on his website, bridgepress7@gmail.com, which we'll also share with you. Quick plug, we are doing this as a kickoff in what we hope is going to be an ongoing, occasional, in a Putney way series of Putney gatherings online until we get in-person gatherings up and running again, and perhaps even after that. Next month's event, January 27th, 7 o'clock, is going to feature artisanal mixologist Willa Van Nostrand and cousin chef Emmeline Daly, class of 07. Willa is class of 05. We'll send more information about that. And that is, yeah, tonight's about Brian. We'll get into that one next. The next thing I'm going to do is unmute everybody really quickly so we can all just say goodnight, and then we're going to end the call. And I just want to thank everybody for being here. Extra special thanks and good wishes to Brian. It's been really fun. So somebody, Kalia, will you unmute everybody? Let's see.
Fabulous. It was great. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Wish I'd been in one of your long weekends.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks, Brian.
Brian.
Thank you.
Thank
you
so much.
Love your work.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon.
Love, brother.
Bye.
Sounds like
Brian.
Jeff.
Brian.
Good night.
Bye, Brian.
Bye, Brian.
Sure, bye,
Brian.
Bye.
Hoot.
They're great.
Yeah. Where are you?
I'm 20 feet away from you.
Hey, you.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Joanna.
Real free.
Hi, Kate.
Hey.
It's nice to see you. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Joanna.
Katrina, where are you?
Hi.
Say hello to your mom for me.
I will, thanks.
Now there are 53 people.
I have a picture of you.